First of all, I had told Chris before that I was like concerned that there would be zero people here and it would just be him and me on the stage.
Which would have been fine.
So I'm like incredibly grateful to every single person who has turned up to save me kind of humiliation because Thursday morning in Davos can be a little difficult. Chris is the chief product officer at Meta. He has been at Meta basically since the start with a brief departure and return a couple of years ago. And yeah, I think I'll just start asking you questions rather
Let's
than.
do it.
And
Yeah.
we've got about a little less than half an hour here. And I think like I wanted to go back to something we talked about. I guess when I was trying to figure out what how we should think about tech coverage. We went for a walk in your hometown and just sort of talked about globalization and deglobalization and this sort of increasingly complicated world you guys operate in. And I guess I'm curious how you're thinking about that. Like, are we in 5 years going to be in a world where Facebook, where Instagram are in every country in the world competing with the same set of couple of platforms in every country in the world? Are you guys going to start to retreat from markets and double down in others? I mean, how do you see that pattern?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, and we talked a lot to our employees about this, is just the importance of India. If you look at where the internet is coming online, where people are coming online,
Yeah.
if you look at, the economies that are growing the fastest, India is a market that really does need to be understood for everybody building technology, especially Californian companies who tend to be biased towards American users who use iPhones, who are lovely, but don't represent the vast majority of people, especially if you look at WhatsApp as an example. I mean, WhatsApp, I work with 4 apps, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Messenger. WhatsApp is the most used.
Yeah.
It's over 2 billion people a day. It's 104 billion messages a day. You wrap your head around that. And it's growing quickly. It's growing quickly in the US. And it's growing from markets like Miami and New York because they're markets that have a lot of crossover with international folks. So I think there's a thing with Californian tech companies building software, like really need to try harder. And I say this to our teams, to like deeply understand markets that have come online and are just very different from American audiences and European and Western European audiences. So that's point one. I mean, I think point two is just the significance of TikTok. First of all, it's an incredibly good product.
Yeah, I was going to say you just jumped to my second question. So
Yeah,
keep going.
I just think,
How goes the war with TikTok?
I mean, I think the war goes well. I have a huge amount of respect for them. And I think if you look at most software most people use most of the time, up until very recently, was built in a very small amount of cities on Earth. And, I'm in the software industry and I believe software is important. But if you think about TikTok, part of what's so significant about it is that it wasn't made in California or Seattle. And it is a very meaningful product in terms of how people spend their time, especially young people. And I think it's a really good product. And I think if you look at the core of what made it work, it's not the short form video format. It's actually a really sophisticated recommendation system that ByteDance had been developing for years, since well before TikTok and before Musical.ly. They were working on recommending news content inside of China. So, everybody was watching WeChat and Alibaba, and I think a lot of us looked at them admiring a lot of the just sort of like business acumen and software acumen of those companies. But I think with TikTok, it's just sort of a new thing where like people have used Chinese hardware for a while, and there are plenty of Chinese parts in your phone. But I think we're now at the point where I think the Chinese companies are building software that competes globally.
Should they be allowed to? Do you think they're a threat to American national security?
I have no reason to believe that. I'm not deep on their operations, and I'm certainly not.
Meta at times appears to have pursued a strategy that is, let's like see if we can get the American government to crush TikTok. And is that not the plan anymore?
I'm not a national security expert, but I think they're a serious company. I have every reason to believe they're a diligent company, and they have the interests of their users in mind. But I just think that phenomenon, I think there's the conversation about AI is really interesting and important right now, separate from ChatGPT and separate from the image and sort of film generation models that people are talking about right now. You have the recommendation systems. which are basically like, here's a billion pieces of content. And I do think this is the most important problem on the internet.
And do you think, does TikTok have
Yeah.
more sophisticated AI doing recommendation engines than you guys do? Is that their core advantage there?
It's absolutely one of them. I think if they're, I think, Reels is doing quite well. If you look at Instagram and Facebook, Reels is our competitive product with TikTok. It's a short form video recommendation system. Most of the content most people are seeing is from creators. It's from semi-professional sort of internet people in various categories, in comedy and cooking. And in some cases, like pretty serious journalism is being distributed this way. I think a lot of the war in Ukraine, for teenagers in America was probably seen through TikTok.
Yeah.
And I think that's worth understanding as well. So yeah, I think the AI system that powers these services is by far the most important ingredient. And then there's, of course, a whole bunch of other things you need to get right.
And is that something that you think that you guys are scrambling to catch up with? Is it, and I think there's some question about, is their recommendation engine more sophisticated, or do they just have more data coming in the front end?
I wouldn't say we're scrambling at this point. I mean,
or do you feel you've caught up?
No, I don't feel we've caught up, but I feel we've made really good progress. I mean, we've reported 50% growth, in a 6-month period in November, hundreds of millions of views a day. People like the product. We're seeing people engage with it on both Instagram and Facebook.
Do you feel there was a sort of, I mean, you led, I mean, I can't remember the line, it was a ruthless execution. Chris sent a memo promising ruthless execution in the new era of Facebook, and there was...
Well, I didn't promise it, I hoped for it.
That's a different management strategy. But, in any case, and then there was a bunch of very quick changes to short-form video and how many people were seeing it. Do you feel like you made mistakes in that early period, in that kind of right after that, or was that all kind of right kind of experimentation?
I mean, I sent the memo at a time when we were really trying to help the company focus on fewer priorities.
Yeah.
And this was part of just dealing with the macroeconomy last year, encountering our own headwinds with the business and trying to, help our company do what a lot of other companies, I mean, obviously not just in tech, are doing, which is like, all right, we're a business. Let's focus on what matters. Let's find the things that don't and shut it down. And the memo I wrote to the company was really trying to shift the culture a little bit towards one that really understood that every single person needed to be focused on the right thing.
I guess you could describe it as hardcore.
You could. Yeah, you certainly could.
Do you think that that Elon's approach to, I don't know, this point of view that you guys basically just employ way too many engineers and pay them too much and they don't work hard enough, is that on target?
I don't agree with that. I mean, I think, and I'll be interested to see, what his experience is like running a social media platform. I think I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I think even if you just look at content moderation and safety, it's a very hard problem.
Yeah.
You're dealing with billions of pieces of content in hundreds of languages, all of which needs to be decided upon in real time. Otherwise, it doesn't matter.
Do you think Twitter's in a death spiral?
No, but I'm not inside of Twitter, and I don't have any information there that you don't have.
Yeah, I know, right? It is easy. I guess yes, we can sort of see how he's doing in real time. He's very expressive. The other, just obviously huge initiative for the company, which I mistakenly referred to as Facebook a moment ago, but which is called Meta,
Yeah.
is the Metaverse. You were on a panel with Neil I think you're basically here because you got to be on a panel with Neil Stephenson.
It was a huge. Does everyone know Neil Stephenson was the author of Snow Crash and Cryptonomicon? He's one of the sci-fi luminaries. So he was here yesterday.
Seems like it was fun for you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But so I'm curious. I guess I'd sort of ask you the same question about, because it just the sort of intensifying focus on VR, on Oculus. Were there early mistakes you made? Have you learned from? Are there sort of lessons you've learned really specifically over the last year in that space?
In VR specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, it's a new market, so you don't even know how heavy should the headset be, what kind of content should be on it. Do people want to wear something in front of their eyes, for over an hour? Should it be tethered or not? Do they want to put a phone in front of a thing and try that? And so, we tried a bunch of things out. I mean, what we learned.
What was the biggest surprise for you?
One of the biggest surprises is that the majority of the time spent in VR is social already. And if you look at the phone, it took a while to get there. If you look at the PC, it took decades. Most of what you were doing on your PC was a single player experience. If you look at consoles, Xbox, PlayStation, remember the first few generations were not primarily about doing stuff with your friends. You were playing alone. You might be playing with your friends. So VR, there was this question like, is this just going to be an experience people use to get away? And that would have been a bad outcome for us because our whole business is built on building stuff for people to do together. And quite quickly, we got to see that the majority of time spent inside of VR is social, which is neat. And it's people, it could be doing fitness together. It could be walking around a world together. It could be productivity experiences. So that surprised me in a good way. I've been surprised at sort of what we're learning watching film evolve in VR. And so I don't know if you guys have ever watched, there's a Netflix series called The Story of Film, which is like a 10-part TV series that walks through each decade of film, starting in like Menlo Park, New Jersey, with like Thomas Edison. And you get to see how long it took us to figure out editing and like makeup, and business models came decades later. So
Right.
I think it's like a good refrain to remind ourselves where we are in the story of social media, where we are in the story of VR. We're in the first decade.
I think we're still in the. I mean, I think that there's a belief maybe that I have that actually we're in the late days of social media. That social media is kind of unraveling, and the things we're talking about, Reels, TikTok, VR experiences, aren't really social media the way you and I think about them, the way people typically think about them. They're not, they're not sort of wide open platforms that are largely populated by where most individuals are contributing. They're experiences where most people are consuming. Am I misunderstanding that?
I don't agree with that. I mean, I think if you look at why the format works, it's because of how shareable it is.
Right, but I'm not going to be making VR content.
Well, let's separate VR from Reels and TikTok. I mean, I think if you look at why TikTok, part of why those products are so compelling is they become conversation pieces. So I don't know, in the 90s, we'd talk about Seinfeld and what was in the newspaper. And I think...
I guess I think of that as entertainment, not social media.
Well, I think they're
like
they're very...
That I watch a Mr. Beast video and talk about it with my friend is different from I make a video.
I mean, in some ways, this is a definition question.
Okay, fair enough.
I think they blend together.
Tim Cook, Apple, launching what sounds from its specs like a very similar product to Oculus, some new box you can put on your head.
And that's how we'll market it. Ben Smith, ladies and gentlemen.
That's why I'm in the market. That's why I'm in the
New
marketing
box,
business.
right.
I mean that in the most positive sense. Do you think that because they aren't a social company, I mean, I guess that's sort of what I take from what you said before, that even if it's a beautiful product, it's going to be sterile and antisocial and nobody will want it. Is that a correct interpretation?
Oh, I mean, I would bet that it's a good product. I mean, I think it's going to be hard. It's a tricky category because you need a few iterations. We've learned to get it right. And I think they're going to learn a lot in the first few versions, but I think they saw that with the watch. It took a few iterations of them for them to figure out how to get the watch right. But look, they're an excellent hardware company and they have an excellent marketing company, and I think it's good for consumers and it's good for the general question of how does this stuff play out that Apple's entering the market. It'll make things trickier for us.
Yeah. So I have one more question, then maybe we'll take some audience questions. I'm sort of looking around and see like world-leading experts in finance and metaverse stuff and anti-Semitism and other important and exciting things. No anti-Semites. We have the head of the Anti-Defamation League here, just to clarify. Not that kind of anti-Semitism expert. I spent a lot of time covering the question of whether Meta was a monopoly, and whether the U.S. government should regulate it as a monopoly. Do you think how would you answer that question?
What's the question?
Is Meta a monopoly?
I don't think there's any way you can pull any definition of a market together in which we have the kind of market share that would constitute.
Were you 5 years ago?
I mean, I haven't done the math, but I wouldn't think we were ever anywhere close.
But do you think, that in some ways, the new challenges to the business have saved you from regulation? I guess that's...
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think if you look at Snapchat, if you look at Twitter, if you look at YouTube, I mean, these markets are very competitive. They always have been. I think that's a good thing, by the way.
Such a positive character, Chris.
What do you mean?
I'm not drawing you into any conflicts you don't want to be drawn into. But sorry, we'd love to take a couple questions from the audience if anybody has any. Go ahead.
By any means, but hopefully I'm allowed to ask a question.
Still, yes.
It's a question about news and Meta's relationship with the news industry. Clearly, the Journalism Preservation Act in the US didn't progress, but it looks like the Canadian Online News Act is moving ahead. The math isn't that big. I mean, we're talking about 304 million a year across a bunch of companies, so that's not, but it feels like that actually impacts your ability to do products and other business. In India, the Competition Commission is also looking at it from a news angle. There is a sense that Facebook has pulled back from the news industry. I'm just curious about your thoughts on your relationship with the news industry and how does it affect big markets like India?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's some specific deals that we've pulled back on, which are business deals related to sort of content partnerships. If you look at the vast majority of news consumption on Facebook and Instagram, it's not really connected to any content partnerships. It's just connected to media companies publishing story, like the story in the stories tray, publishing into feed, increasingly publishing into reels. And like the best way we can help publishers is just building a good experience around that. It's what people want, is when I connect with this thing, I want good experiences from it. I want it to be fast, and like helping publishers get the format right ends up being, I think, the highest leverage thing we can actually do. News is not a very big part of the experience. I mean, it's less than 5% if you were to just look at impressions.
And diminishingly, right? With you've reduced certain engagement signals that have seemed to have pushed some political news out of the feed, right?
Well, we made a change that looked at political content in general in response to a broad-based set of user feedback that there was too much politics. And they weren't referring to news specifically when we did surveys. It was just like political content. And so we had made some changes in a broad-based way that just looked at things that were more sort of divisive and political and tried to find ways to tune those down. Most people want content from their friends and family. They don't want to miss it. And then on top of that, they want entertaining and informative content. I mean, that's a summary of 10 years of user feedback on the products. So we're not getting out of the news business. I think providing a good experience for publishers is really important. I think getting it in the right proportion to what users want is my most important responsibility, which is where we focus our time. And the other sort of key thing we could get into, maybe in a longer discussion, is how to help with subscriptions, where sort of driving subscriptions to publications like Semafor is from a business perspective, probably the most important thing we can do to help news publishers have economics that make sense. So that is the other, I would say, area of interest on that.
Jonathan?
My name is Jonathan Greenblatt. I'm the CEO of ADL. So in a previous life, I was a product manager at a technology company. And so I think one of the challenges in terms of the issue of content moderation is the first generation of social media companies or social media products like Facebook or any of the others weren't really designed initially around content moderation. I don't think folks really contemplated like how bad it could get. And so companies like Meta in Facebook or, Twitter, et cetera, have thought a lot now about, okay, how do we kind of re-engineer or iterate to improve for that? As we talk about the metaverse, brand new product universe, if you will, how are you sort of vis-a-vis the product design, like in the requirements, thinking about content moderation? And I ask this because we're seeing a lot of challenges on Roblox, Fortnite, these other things that are sort of on the way to the metaverse.
Yep.
Again, no attention, no content moderation isn't built into the, if you will, the business rules of those. So how do you think about it in terms of
it's a good question. I mean, I'll just say the obvious thing, which is we're early and we're engaged with the community of folks who are safety experts and security experts early. I mean, that's the most important lesson, at least that we've learned, is like before we even built this thing, we were trying to talk about what safety standards should be in place. We've contributed to funds like the XR Research Fund, which is basically bringing academics in specific areas like bullying, child safety, hate speech, et cetera, to be part of the conversation on like, all right, what should we pay attention to and what design problems should we try and solve up front? So that's thing one. I would say thing two is just like paying attention to youth and the parental controls is just a very critical area. If you look at Roblox, if you look at Fortnite, if you look at the metaverse-like experiences, Minecraft is another example that hundreds of millions of people are using, they're young people. And that looks differently than early adopters to email, for example. And so we're just in a zone where the interaction between parents and their kids, I'm a parent of 2 kids, is really critical to getting this right. What do parental controls look like? What tools allow parents to see how their kids are using the product? I mean, this applies to phones too. Sort of what stuff happens to the experience of somebody who's 14 or who's 15. I think that's just like the most important zone that I'm paying the most attention to right now. I think the thing about the metaverse is most of it is going to be synchronous. So it's going to be more like a phone call than just like a whole bunch of text and photos that is being distributed around, which is a terribly ugly synopsis of,
More like a phone call.
It's just like, it's going to be audio and video. It's going to be happening
that's really
live,
interesting.
right? And I just think about that when you think about like, okay, probably not going to be interacting with thousands of people at a time. You're probably going to have environments that are more pseudonymous. So you're not going to have WhatsApp, which is phone number based and private. You're not going to have Facebook, which is mostly real identity, which protects us from a lot of safety issues, as most people are who they say they are. So you're in this sort of synchronous space that's going to be more pseudonymous, but where people are going to gravitate towards experiences that look like what they want to be in. So maybe it looks a little bit more like a Reddit. At least that's what I imagine.
Do you imagine in like Reddit, sort of community managers, mods coming out of the community? Is that
I think moderation is going to be critical. And we learned this with Facebook groups, is basically, I mean, people ask me all the time, like, are there any algorithms for keeping discourse safe in a conversation? And it's like, yeah, there are a bunch, but the most important thing is if one person feels accountable as a moderator for keeping a conversation safe, for telling people what's out of line. And that's why Reddit has moderators, and that's why in Facebook groups you have admins, is because if a person knows it's their job and feels responsible for the safety of everybody in the group, that's like a really critical role.
Yeah, I'll just say, like, Wikipedia has a lot of lessons in this.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Because Wikipedia demonstrates the kind of consensus that happens.
Yeah.
And it's not always good, but it regresses to a better mean than some of the other environments we see online.
Yeah, so I would say those are the two thoughts that we're looking at when we think about design.
Great, thank you.
We got time for one more question.
Hi, Gabo Aurora. I'm a VR creator, and I'm mostly defending your metaverse strategy. I make VR, and I did Clouds Over Cedra with the UN. I do all these things. I make things in the metaverse, and I'm so happy that you invest so much in the metaverse, because I think most people don't realize that without Meta's investment, so many of us wouldn't be where we are, and it's just incredible. But I'm also sad because I think there's a real trust issue that is a legacy of what's happened with social media that's kind of polluting this really important new strategy. And I just wanted to ask specifically about the supernatural within antitrust case that Lena Khan had brought up with Meta, and whether that caught you by surprise. For me, I feel like it's a legacy of that mistrust and a misunderstanding. And I think it would really set a dangerous precedent. And I just wanted to get your comments on that.
On the acquisition itself?
Well, just like the
or trust in general?
Or the attempt.
I guess in a way is to try to rephrase it.
By the way, I'm familiar with your work and I'm a huge fan. So.
Yeah, and is the question, is Meta actually in a position to do this stuff, given that the U.S. government is going to kind of come in and that there's this sort of already very tense relationship, that Supernatural, that acquisition looks like it could be getting blocked. I don't know. I guess in a way, are you the wrong people to be leading this for that reason? Is that a interpretation? That...
Yeah, or, how do you deal with this lack of trust? Because I think it's a mistake to block it. I think it should go through. I think it would really damage the overall strategy if you're not able to kind of, acquire in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say about the general question, I think trust is something that is built over a long period of time. And it can be lost easily. And that's with a company or with another person. And I think our responsibility is to take the issues the issues around trust, around privacy, around safety, around security, around our role in democracy, around sort of what conversations we have when we bring a new product to life. I mean, this is a company that's grown up a lot, over the period I've been there. And I think trust is something that requires sustained, repeated, positive interactions over a long period of time. That's something, our product managers and everybody at the company understands, when they wear their hat to work every day and sort of in each of these areas, specifically the sensitive ones. I think we're taking security and safety as seriously as a company of our size could take it. If you look at investment level, if you look at the transparency we release every quarter, we release by category, by region, how effective we were at each category of information. I mean, I wish we'd gotten there earlier. However, I'm really proud of the way we're showing up. And I don't think that earns you trust immediately, but I think over time it does. And that's kind of where we're at.
If I can ask one last question, just because I'm among the people who, partly for this purposes, partly as we internationalize, partly because my family isn't totally American, find myself more and more on WhatsApp, partly when I need to get a hold of you. And I don't think I've ever paid a dime to WhatsApp. I don't think I've ever seen an ad in WhatsApp. I mean, if WhatsApp, in some ways, as you suggested, it's the biggest product you have by some measures, and it's the one that is dominant in the category and growing. When do you start charging me? How's that going to work?
We don't plan to charge you for WhatsApp, Ben. So the business that's working there right now is Click to WhatsApp. So it's an ad on Instagram or Facebook that allows you to, as a business, advertise for somebody to connect with you on WhatsApp. So if you're driving around in Brazil or in India or in Mexico, you'll see this as a way businesses are asking to be connected with. That's already a significant business for us. I think it's a $9 billion a year business. It's growing quickly. And then the big area we're investing in for WhatsApp is business messaging, which is really just what is the interface for how businesses and people can connect in the product.
So free for consumers and not kind of spammy advertising, but more kind of
how do you build a
voluntary.
good experience for businesses?
Yeah.
So it's a business trying to get in touch with you, but then it's all the interactions that happen downstream. So it can feel more like customer support,
Right.
or more like something you might make a phone call for today. Yeah, we see that opportunity for hundreds of millions of businesses. You already have over 100 million businesses using the WhatsApp SMB app. That's pretty crazy.
Is that largely India, Brazil? Where?
LATAM, it's big in LATAM, it's big in India, but it's big, WhatsApp's quite large.
What is WhatsApp's penetration in the U.S. going to be in 5 years? Sorry, that's too far. In a year.
I don't know what we've released there, but I mean, I'm excited that it's growing. I mean, my sister, a big personal milestone for me was somebody in my family finally got on WhatsApp.
Well, you're sort of refusing to communicate with people on other platforms. So.
What do you mean?
I don't know. I feel like that's when I need to get you. I've sort of figured out that that's my best bet. When I'm desperate for a really high-profile, interesting speaker for our panel at Davos. I'm like,
yeah, I mean, she's in Miami, and she's just an example. Part of what we're starting to see in the U.S. is it's a good product, and it's encrypted. I mean, we're the best at privacy in a messaging context. So I'm excited to see people adopt it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you all for coming out this morning.
Thanks.